record this because again, there's a few kids that are absent. And so I'm going to send this to them afterwards. I'm going to put it on like our classroom and for the other 5th grade classes. But yes, we're starting here. So as many of you guys know, we have spent the past about month working on what book? 4 Perfect Pebbles. And today we have the opportunity to meet the person on the cover. We're going to be listening to Marion Blumenthal Lazan, and she's going to be telling us her story. And we've had the pleasure of speaking with her in the past. And I'm very happy that we've been able to connect even more people this time. Last time we only spoke to less than 30 people, and now we've already got a class, 3 full classes, and a 4th class is joining right now. So we have nearly 100 kids that are going to be seeing and watching this presentation. So again, as I told my class, I hope everyone that's going to be watching has some sort of notebook, some sort of pencil to write down and take some different notes from things that we're going to talk about, because we are going to have a small little assignment afterwards. But for now, please give your attention to Marion Blumenthal Lazan.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, for your kind and meaningful introduction. I thank you and Principal Ham for giving me the opportunity to virtually visit with your PS 107 5th grade students. And how I so wished I could be with all of you in person. But since we still have this COVID in our midst, we will use this amazing Zoom technology to connect with one another. From what I can see, you all must have had a good night's sleep in comfortable beds. You got up, you got washed your teeth, got dressed in good-looking clothes that fit you well. You had a nourishing breakfast, and then you were lucky enough to come to school for a thorough, good education. When I was your age, I didn't have any one of those comforts and necessities that we all take so much for granted. Let me explain as I share my story with you. It is my childhood experiences during World War II in the concentration camps. I will tell you about our liberation and how we finally started our lives anew in our blessed United States of America. Mine is a story that Anne Frank might have told had she survived. And as most of you know, Anne Frank was a young Jewish girl who died along with most of her family in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. This is also a story that conveys a message of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. After the presentation, I will be pleased to answer some of your questions. Life in the early 1930s in Germany was very much for my family, as it is here for most of you today. Never did we think that the anti-Semitic incidents there would ever lead to very much. My father was in a successful shoe business in a small town. My parents, 2-year older brother and I lived comfortably with my grandparents above the shoe store. Life for Jews was made increasingly more difficult. And in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were formulated and enforced. The following are just some of the many restrictions imposed on the Jews in Germany. Jews were not allowed into theaters, into parks, or into swimming pools. All public schools were closed to Jewish children. Then there was an evening curfew for the Jews. Jews were only allowed to shop during specific hours of the day, and non-Jews were not allowed to shop in Jewish-owned stores. Non-Jews were just not allowed to associate with Jewish people. And then a big letter J for Jew was stamped on ID cards and on passports. These restrictions went on, and it was then that my parents decided to make arrangements to leave the country. My grandparents, who were in the late 70s and ill, refused to leave their home. They could not understand the urgency or the necessity of doing so. My grandparents passed away in 1938, just 11 days within each other. And soon thereafter, we received our necessary papers for our immigration to America. I was just 4 years old at that time. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht or Crystal Night. It was the night of broken glass when the Nazis and their many followers smashed the windows and the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores. Jewish establishments, synagogues, and Jewish books were burned and destroyed. This was the beginning of a massive pogrom against the Jews in Germany, a massive verbal and physical assault against all German Jews. In reality, this was the beginning of the Holocaust. On November 12th, following Kristallnacht, the German government actually fined the Jewish population for the damage caused that night. These imposed taxes were used to rearm Germany. The night of Kristallnacht, our apartment was ransacked. All valuables were thrown into a pillowcase and taken away. But worst of all was that they transported my father to concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. All sorts of terrible stories were related to my mother, and we did not know if we would ever see my father again. He was released after 3 weeks only because our papers were in order for our emigration to America. And to think that just a few years prior, he had been awarded the Iron Cross for his military service in the German army of World War I. We were forced to sell both our home and our business for a fraction of its worth. And soon thereafter, in January of 1939, we left for Holland, from where we were to sail to the United States. And for almost 9 months, while awaiting our quota number from the American State Department, my parents were assigned to take care of some 125 children. These young children had been sent by their parents from various parts of Europe to escape from the Nazis. In December of that year, 1939, we were deported to the detention camp of Westerbork in Holland to await our departure day to America. Camp Westerbork was constructed by the Dutch to accommodate Jews from various parts of Europe. In May of 1940, just 1 month before our planned departure date, the Germans invaded Holland and we were trapped. All of our belongings, which were about to be loaded on board ship, were burned and destroyed as the harbor of Rotterdam was bombed. Under Dutch control, Camp Westerbork was tolerable. My mother, father, brother, and I shared 2 small rooms. We all ate in a communal dining room, and at that time, there was enough food for us so that we did not go hungry. Adults were assigned to various work duties. My father worked to repair shoes. My mother worked in the kitchen. We children had a makeshift education and lived a very dull, stagnant life. Several months later, when the Nazi SS took over the command of Westerbork, we became acquainted with the ever-present, terrifying 12-foot high barbed wire. And as thousands of Jews were rounded up, many taken from their hiding places, as was Anne Frank and her family, Camp Westerbork became overcrowded. And it was at that time that we had to share our small quarters with another family. And then the dreadful transports to the concentration and extermination camps in Eastern Europe began. This started in early 1942. And from then on, every Monday night, lists of those to be deported were posted, causing incredible anxiety, anguish, and fear. And then on Tuesday mornings, men, women, and little ones were marched to a nearby railroad platform from where they were transported. This area became known as Boulevard de Misère. It was an area of complete misery. At 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, the trains left for their destination. And of the total 120,000 men, women, and children, that departed Westerbork, 102,000 were doomed never to return. In January of 1944, it was our turn to be shipped out. We children welcomed change of environment. We were very naive and we welcomed the move. We were allowed to take one knapsack each, and whatever we could stuff into it, we were permitted to take. When we approached the railroad platform and we saw the cattle cars in which we were to travel, our fears began to mount. Adults suspected, and they somehow knew what was in store for us. I remember that it was a bitter cold, pitch black, rainy night when we arrived at our destination, concentration camp Bergen-Belsen in Germany. We were pulled and dragged out of the cattle cars and greeted by the German guards who were shouting at us and threatening us with their weapons and with the most vicious attack dogs by their sides. I was a very frightened 9-year-old, and to this day, I still feel a certain sense of fear whenever I see a German Shepherd. Bergen-Belsen was divided into various areas. It was sectioned off and surrounded by electrified barbed wire. Guards were always in strategically placed high guard towers, and in the evenings, as soon as it would turn dark, the bright searchlights from above would constantly sweep the campgrounds. We were placed in the section that was known as the Sternlager, or the Star Camp, named so because we had to continue wearing that yellow star which had been issued to us back in Holland. Men were on one side of the camp and the women on the other. And this did make it possible at times for families to get a glimpse of one another. We were placed in this particular section of the camp with the hope of being exchanged for German nationals who the British put under house arrest because they were citizens of an enemy country. Unfortunately, that hope never materialized for our family. 600 of us, 600 of our people were crammed into each of the crude, wooden, heatless barracks, meant for 100 when originally built. There were triple-decker bunk beds with 2 people sharing each bunk. German winters were bitter cold and very long. We were given only one thin blanket per bunk and a straw-filled mattress. And this bunk was our only living quarters, and that for 2 people. I was very lucky that I was able to share a bunk with my mother and that my brother was able to share a bunk with our father. But can you imagine 2 adults, 2 strangers sharing a bunk under such horrendous conditions? A bunk that was no larger than the small cot bed that we're all so familiar with. I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon were dead, naked bodies thrown one on top of the other. Toilets and so-called washing facilities were at a great distance in the most primitive outhouses. Toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. There was no privacy, there was no toilet paper, there was no soap, and hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slosh through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. Every morning, every single morning, without fail, we were ordered to line up on a huge field. It was called an Appellplatz, 5 in a row as we were counted. We would have to stand there until each and every one of us was accounted for, often from early morning till late at night, without food, without water, no matter what the weather, without protective clothing. Frostbite was common. We would treat our affected toes and fingers with the warmth of our own urine. Our diet consisted of a slice of bread a day, some hot watery soup with grizzly meats and turnips and potato peels. Bread was later cut back and given to us just once a week, and only if our so-called quarters were needed in order. Our birthday present to one another was that little piece of bread that we had saved up from the previous week. Once a month, we were marched to an area to shower, and there, under the watchful eyes of the guards, we were ordered to undress. We had heard about exterminations and gas chambers in other areas of Europe, and we therefore were never sure when the faucets were turned on as to what would come out, water or gas. The Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Unfortunately, they did succeed with many of our people. It was not uncommon for people who were no longer responsible for their actions to attempt escape, even though they knew that the chance to succeed was next to impossible. But they also felt they had nothing more to lose. The failure of their attempts were obvious when we saw their lifeless bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Malnutrition, dysentery, and the loss of the will to go on is what destroyed body and mind. Death was an everyday occurrence. The dark, crowded quarters often caused us to trip and fall over the dead. Bodies could not be taken away fast enough. We as children saw things that no one, no matter what the age, should ever have to see. I know, of course, that you've all heard, you've read, you've studied a little bit, the adults have seen movies, perhaps even true documentaries about the Holocaust. But the constant foul odor, the filth, continuous horror and fear surrounded by death is indescribable. There is no way that this can be put accurately into words or pictures. Our bodies, hair, and clothes were infested with lice. We learned that there was a distinct difference between head lice and clothes lice. Squashing them between my thumbnails became my primary pastime. Much of my time was taken up with make-believe games, and one game, a game based on superstition, became very important to me. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a torturous, painful, very difficult game to play. What if I couldn't find the 3rd or 4th pebble? Might that mean that 1 or 2 of my family members would not pull through? Nevertheless, this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. After a number of months on our meager diets, our stomach shrunk so that the hunger was no longer painful. Teenagers and men suffered most from malnutrition and were the first to die. Those who lasted the longest were the women, and mothers in particular. It was their strong will to keep their children alive that kept them going. And my mother was one of those remarkable ladies. There is no doubt in my mind that it was my mother's inner strength and fortitude that finally saw us through. One day, my mother was able to smuggle some potatoes and some salt from the kitchen where she worked, and somehow managed to cook some soup in secret. This was done on our bunk. I was on the bunk with her, trying to hide and shield what she was doing. Soup was simmering, just about finished, when the German guards entered our barrack for surprise inspection. In our rush to hide that setup, the boiling soup spilled on my leg. We had been taught self-discipline and self-control the hard way, for I knew for sure that if I had cried out, it would have cost us our lives. This happened in the spring of 1945. I was just 10 years old, pretty much your age. The population in Kemperg and Belgium were dying off rapidly, but not nearly fast enough to satisfy the Nazis. Several weeks later, it was decided to send 3 trainloads of our people to Eastern Europe, towards the extermination camps and the gas chambers. We did not know that Auschwitz, with its gas chambers, had already been liberated. My family was among the 2,500 on the last of these 3 trains. It was April of 1945. The Russian army was closing in from the northeast, and the British and the Americans from the west. Under normal conditions, this train ride from Bergen-Belsen to whatever area of Eastern Europe they're going to send us would have taken no more than 10 hours. But because the Germans tried to evade the Allies, we were en route for 2 long weeks without food, without water, without medical supplies, without sanitary facilities. That meant no toilets. Whenever the train came to a stop, those who were able, those who were strong enough, were permitted to get out and take a drink from a nearby stream or dig up roots to eat. My mother remembered taking some sort of a pot and collecting water from the locomotive, and who knows what else that pot was used for. The need for water at that time was almost more important than food because of the severe dehydration due to the dysentery and the high fever due to the typhus. Let me briefly explain typhus. It is a highly contagious, deadly disease that's caused from filth and spread by lice. At the same time, while the train was at a standstill, the newly dead were taken off and buried along the tracks. In addition, our train was subject to frequent air attacks by the Allies. It is truly remarkable how any one of us was able to survive under such horrendous conditions. In fact, 500 of our people, that's 1 out of every 5, died en route or shortly thereafter. My burned leg was severely infected, and it was impossible to keep the wound clean or lice-free. In late April, after 14 days of this surreal and horrifying journey, the German guards stormed frantically through the train, seeking civilian clothing so that they would not be recognized by the Allies. And we knew then that the war was coming to an end. It was the Russian army that liberated our train and led us to a nearby farm village in Eastern Germany. Most of the inhabitants had fled, and we took over the homes. Kitchens were stocked with rich and ample food, actually much too rich for our starved bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 16 kilos, or as we know it here, 35 pounds. My mother weighed a mere 70 pounds. The Russians, in a crude way, tried to help us the best that they could. I was brought to a nearby clinic for medical attention. My leg was in very bad condition, and I was close to losing it. Fortunately, it was decided to treat the wound, and I was very lucky that my leg responded to medication and it gradually healed. As I regained my strength, I also relearned to walk. And in the interim, our heads were shaved because that was the only way that we could rid ourselves of head lice. Although we were all weak, ill, and thoroughly exhausted, I vividly remember the spring of 1945. The weather was beautiful, sunny and bright. Trees and grass were lush and green. Flowers were in bloom. Birds were singing. It was a wonderful, exciting feeling to be free at long last. We were all ill with typhus, but my father had to die from it 6 weeks after our liberation, and this after 6.5 years of mental torment and physical abuse. My 12-year-old brother, Albert, actually helped bury our father. When I talk about those years, it is as though I'm relating a nightmare, a very bad dream. I separate myself from it ever having happened to me, and that is how I deal with it. It is a wonderful story of how we gradually recuperated and were sent back to Holland to start our lives anew. My brother and I were eventually placed in the children's home in preparation to live in what was then British mandated Palestine, and we know today as Israel. Most of the children in this home survived alone without their parents. I felt like a total misfit. I needed to relearn how to settle into a society, had no training for that. Here I was by this time, 11 years old. I had never been in the store. I had no idea what money was all about, had almost no table manners. It was like learning to live all over again. It was in this home that we became reacquainted with life in its normal state. Meals served us were delicious and nourishing. And you can imagine that just about anything and everything tasted good to us. And though our surrogate parents provided a very strict environment, much love and care were given us. I began my first formal education at that time at the age of 11 and a half. We were taught the secular subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, in a Montessori school where we progressed at our own pace. The Dutch language in which we were taught was all new to us. We also received a thorough education in Hebrew and in religious studies. The British, who were governing Palestine in the 1940s, had issued what was known as the White Paper, restricting the number of Jews permitted into the land. They were intercepting many of the refugee ships and interning the survivors on the island of Cyprus, and in some cases, actually turned the ships back to Europe. In November of 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine between Arabs and Jews, which in May of 1948 led to the establishment of the State of Israel. In 1947, just 1 year prior Israel becoming a state, our illegal voyage from Holland to Palestine was planned, and danger once again loomed over us. And because parents at that time were not permitted to accompany their children, my mother managed to make arrangements for a family of 3 to emigrate to the United States. And thanks to the Holland America line, we were able to use the tickets which had been purchased 10 years earlier. We arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, April 23rd, 1948, by coincidence, exactly 3 years to the day of our liberation. It was a Jewish relief organization, the Hayas, that found a home for us in Peoria, Illinois. I had never heard of Illinois, definitely not Peoria. And there at the age of 13, I once again started life anew in a strange land and again learning a new language, my third new language in less than 3 years. First Dutch, then Hebrew, and now English. And because of my inability to speak English, I at the age of 13 was placed in the 4th grade with 9-year-olds. Although both my brother and I worked long hours after school to help our mom pay bills, I nevertheless found time. I actually made time to take extra courses during the year, attend summer school, and by working very hard in my studies, I was able to be graduated from Peoria Central High School at age 18, ranking 8th in a class of 267 students. It was 2 months after high school graduation that I was married to Nathaniel Lazan, who I had met at the age of 16 in Peoria. And God willing, we'll be celebrating our 69th wedding anniversary this coming August. Nathaniel, give a wave to everyone. Yeah, he deserves that applause, sir. I see you. Okay. He deserves every bit of that applause. He's amazing. Amazingly disciplined and conscientious. After all, he was an Air Force pilot, so you need to have all these attributes. Amazing, amazing. He's wonderful with the computers. Unlike me, he's just a wonderful partner, wonderful husband. I am grateful. I am very grateful that I survived healthy in body, mind, and spirit, and that together with my husband, I'm able to perpetuate my heritage with a wonderful family. We have 3 grown children, all 3 are happily married, and they've given us 9 beautiful grandchildren and 7 magnificent great-grandchildren. Amazing, amazing. And in March of 1996, my memoir, Four Perfect Pebbles, co-authored by Lila Pearl, was published by Green Willow, division of HarperCollins. It is now in its 34th printing in hardback. And then HarperCollins decided to publish a 20th anniversary edition, and this is the one that you chose for. Okay, the story is all the same. It has an afterword, which is very very interesting to read, but I don't like the cover. I do not like the cover. It's that barbed wire that bothers me, but they were in charge, and so it turned out to be what it is. Okay. It's been made available from Scholastic Book Club since 1999, has been translated into German, into Dutch, and then Yad Vashem in Jerusalem published it in Hebrew, and they did a super job on that. And if you all like, you may read it in Japanese. How about that? Maybe there's someone in your school or class who can do just that. But above all, I am so grateful that the story is in book form so that it can be passed on to future generations. And I'm thrilled that a documentary has been made entitled Marion's Triumph, with the actress Deborah Messing as the narrator. So you see that despite all the terrible things that happened to me as a child, my life today is full and rewarding. Although I've spoken to upward of 1.5 million students and adults over these past 25, 30 years, it still has not become easy. However, I do realize the importance of sharing that period of our history with you, simply because in a few short years, we will not be here any longer to give a first-hand account. Yours is the very last generation that will hear these stories firsthand. And I therefore ask you to please share my story or any of the Holocaust stories that you read and hear about. Share them with your friends, share them with your relatives, and someday share them with your children. And yes, even with your grandchildren. When we are not here any longer, it is you who will have to bear witness. As difficult as it is, the horror of the Holocaust must be taught, must be studied, and kept alive. Only then can we guard it from ever happening again. This is the very yellow star that I was forced to wear. It says Jude, which in German means Jew. But just another way to denigrate us, to isolate us, and to set us apart from the rest of society. This represents the Star of David, a beautiful, meaningful Jewish symbol. But the Nazis made it so very ugly. Each of us, each and every one of us must do everything in our power to prevent such hatred, such destruction, and such terror from reoccurring. And we can begin by having love, respect, and tolerance and compassion towards one another, regardless of the religious belief, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of the national origin. This respect towards one another must begin in our homes, around the kitchen table, dining room table, wherever we gather as a family. We, the adults, must pass it on our places of business. You, the students, in your classrooms, in the halls of your school, communities, towns, cities, and only if there's respect and compassion and tolerance towards one another in the countries can we expect a peace in the world. We must begin with you, the students. We must begin with our children. Let us treat people as individuals. Let us look for similarities and respect the differences. Let us build bridges and reach out towards one another. And we must be true to ourselves and not blindly follow a leader without thinking ahead and searching our hearts and our minds as to what the consequences might be. It is not cool to follow just anyone's lead without first checking to see what his or her true intentions are. Please remember these messages. Share them with your friends who are unable to be with us this morning. Share them, remember them, but above all, let us all live by them. We are all aware, or we should be, that 6 million Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust of the Second World War. The population of New York State is about 19 million or so. Can you imagine almost 1 out of every 3 people in the state of New York wiped out? The 6 million also represent 1/3 of the entire pre-World War II Jewish population. Among them were 1.5 million children, children just like you. We also need to remember that there were 5 million non-Jews who lost their lives. Among them were the righteous Gentiles, as we refer to them, very special people, non-Jews who jeopardized their lives to save Jewish families. That would hide them in the attics, that would hide them in the basements, farmers would hide them out in the barns, that were hidden in convents. And when these good people were caught doing what they thought was the right thing to do, they also were deported to concentration camps and in many cases lost their lives. And that brings me to another message. We must never generalize and judge an entire group by the actions of some within that group. These are all universal messages, messages that each and every one of us is familiar with to varying degrees, but needs to be reminded of over and over again. And this certainly was a good opportunity to do so. These messages are the lessons learned from that dark period of our history, and certainly apply to today's world situation, and definitely to our own individual lives. By listening, I hope that you prevent our past from becoming your future. Okay, I now need to share with you something about a very extraordinary special lady, my mother. This was my mother on her 104th birthday. Amazing, amazing, magnificent lady. My mom passed away a few years ago, 6 weeks short of 105. There were 2 things that my mother demanded of my brother and me when we came to America. Number 1, learn English. Learn it quickly. Number 2, work as hard as you can in school and at work in order to succeed. My mother was 40 years old when we came to America, 40, knew no English, learned to read, write, and speak a magnificent English. A remarkable, remarkable lady and a fabulous mother-in-law to Nathaniel, and he was an extraordinary son-in-law to my mom. 2 very, very, very special people. And when my mom was still with us, at one point, we were 5 generations of women. And I refer to that as survival and continuity. Amazing, amazing. My brother, Albert, dealt with this altogether differently than I did. First of all, Al passed away a few years ago. He did not talk about it as freely as you heard it from me this morning. Was happily married, lived in California, but by choice did not bring children into this world. Had a very difficult time with organized religion. All of that made me very sad. But I did not fault Albert. We have to remember he was 2 years older than I am, was with my father in the men's section, and I'm convinced that he saw and experienced things that I did not. God puts us on this earth. He has a beautiful mind. It is this mind that allows us to choose right from wrong, good from evil. Therefore, men did this towards one another. But did he have to make it so bitterly cold when we were standing out there on the Pell all day? I have a direct line. I ask loads of questions. Don't get too many answers, but that's okay. Faith I will always have. After all, here I am, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren, from whom generations will be forthcoming. He made sure that enough of us survived so that we will always be here. I am proud of my faith, as I'm certain you're proud of your faith and of your heritage. But please, 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 let us all remember to respect the right of others to their belief. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another. That is the basis for peace. Had there been respect and tolerance towards one another some 75, 80 years ago, I would not be here with you this morning to share that dark period of our history. 9/11 would not have occurred. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, North Korea, Ukraine, Russia, all these countries that are in such turmoil would be peaceful countries for its people. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. There's very little that we can do against the negativity in our world, but how we treat, behave, and reach out towards one another, that is entirely up to us. Did I ever find my 4 pebbles is a frequently asked question. I always found my 4 pebbles. I made it my business to find them. I cheated all the time. When I found them, I put them in a safe place. Next time I would search for them, I couldn't find the 3rd one or that 4th one. Well, I knew exactly where to go and pick them up. Maybe there was cheating, but it was my game, and guess who made the rules? You need to know that I was only about 9 or 10 years old when things were at its absolute worst. We had nothing to occupy our time with constructively. No paper, no pencils, no books, certainly no games. So I was lucky at such an imaginative mind. My imaginative games were always based on a positive attitude. I would search for a piece of glass, a piece of a mirror, whatever I could find on the dirt ground in Bergen-Belsen. And when the sun would shine, that little piece of glass would cast a reflection onto the ground. And that little wiggly reflection, it became my pet. As long as the sun would shine, I would have my pet. My pet would never, ever die. I would also imagine that one day I once again would have my 3 Bs. And these 3 Bs represent our everyday comforts and necessities that we all take so much for granted. The first B represented a bed. I knew that someday I once again would have my very own bed with a real mattress, clean sheets, and enough blankets to keep me warm. Second B represented a bath, warm water, soap, clean towel, and with that would come toothpaste and a toothbrush, of course. And the 3rd B was bread. I knew that someday I once again would have enough bread so that I would never again go hungry. These imaginative games, if you will, they were my survival techniques. They were my survival skills. Do you know that we all have survival techniques and skills within us? When the need arises, we just have to search for them, find them, and be sure that we put them to work. No one is spared adversity. No one is spared hardship. We all have to overcome obstacles at one time or another, but with perseverance, with determination, with faith, and above all hope, one can overcome just about anything and everything. Above all, never, ever give up hope. It's not so much what happens to a person, it's how we deal with the situation that makes the difference. I came to America and I got acquainted with potato chips. Yep. And whoever was eating them was dipping in something white and creamy. I didn't know from dips, so I thought it was mayonnaise. Well, I couldn't wait to get my own big bag of potato chips and my own jar of mayonnaise. And oh my goodness, did that do a job on me. I very quickly became a big 13-year-old. And remember there I was with these little 9-year-olds, that could have made plenty fun of me. I looked differently than they did, certainly acted differently than they did, but I need you to know that they were so good to me. They helped me with my homework, included me in their games. I hope that when a new student comes into your class, in your school or community, that you too help him or her to adjust to a new situation. Put yourself in his or her place, how you might feel if you're placed in a strange or new environment. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. And you, the students at PS 107, you are so fortunate to be receiving a good education in a beautiful environment with dedicated teachers like Mr. Hoch. Do not take your educational opportunities for granted. Make the most of it. Give your studies an extra measure of hard work. You will never, ever regret it. Nathaniel is from New York. He went to Bradley University in Peoria, lucky me. He went home on vacations, and way back then in the 1950s, long distance telephone calls were very expensive. There were no computers, there was no texting, there was none of this technology, but there was a 3-cent stamp. And with this 3-cent stamp, we would write to one another every single day. Major, major problem. In his letters to me, he would add 5 words that he asked me to define and put into a sentence. That's a lot of nerve with all I had to do, but I knew he meant to help me with my English, and I guess it did work. So Nathaniel, I thank you once again.
It was my pleasure, Marion.
Really, okay. I, on the other hand, would write my letters in rough draft with a dictionary by my side, and only when I was satisfied with the way the letter was written would I dare mail it to him. Talking about a dictionary, my father always carried a little chunky German-English dictionary with him, and he would study the vocabulary in secret whenever possible, always with the hope that someday he would reach America. When we came to the United States back in 1948 and approached New York Harbor, we were told the night before that if we wanted to see the Statue of Liberty, we needed to be on deck bright and early the next morning. Well, you can be sure that each and every one of us was on deck to greet and be greeted by that magnificent symbol of freedom, the freedom that had been denied us for so many years. And when that tall figure of that longed-for symbol appeared, I became too choked up to talk. So many emotions seized me at once: joy and gratitude, bitterness for the cruelties we and so many others had suffered, and deep, deep sadness that Papa, my father, would never know that we had reached America at last. And to this day, when we cross the Verrazano Bridge, you guys probably all know the Verrazano Bridge. It's a big bridge here in New York, long bridge that connects the borough of Staten Island with that of Brooklyn. And when we reach a certain point on that bridge, I will always crane my neck to see the Statue of Liberty. It's a most magnificent, beautiful, meaningful sight. The next time when you have the opportunity, make sure that you visit the Statue of Liberty, okay? You're gonna have vacations coming up, spring vacation, summer vacation. Go visit the Statue of Liberty. It has special meaning, and it has special meaning for each and every one of us. We returned to Germany on various occasions, and the very first time was back in 1995. It was the 50th anniversary of our liberation. And we visited my father's grave. And the reason my father and about 60 others have a private resting place in that farm village where we were liberated was because they died after some of the chaos had subsided. Those who died early on were all buried in mass graves. We also went to Bergen-Belsen, and Bergen-Belsen looks nothing the way I remembered it. Had been burned down under the direction of President Eisenhower, who was then the commander of the Allied forces, because the conditions of the camp would have created tremendous health
hazard. Health hazard.
Tremendous health hazards for that entire region of Germany. So today, other than the newly built documentation, exhibition centers, Bergen-Belsen looks like a park. Green grass, shrubs, trees, really not so bad looking, except for the mounds everywhere, mounds with flags that read, "Here lie 1,000, here lie 2,500. These are the mass graves of our people. We also went to my former hometown of Hoya near Hanover, and there we were greeted by public officials who over and over again apologized for what was done to our people. And then there was a young non-Jewish couple born after the war, took us to the Jewish cemetery, which was in terrible disarray, had not been cared for since 1938. Took us to our family plot, and there among the toppled over stones was a brand new shiny granite footstone with the inscription zur Erinnerung an die zerstörte Grabstelle der Familie Blumenthal, Hoja 1894 bis 1938, in memory of the desecrated plot of the Blumenthal family, Hoya 1894 to 1938, placed there by this non-Jewish couple, unbeknownst to us, a most beautiful, generous, kind gesture. Never thought that I would refer to non-Jewish Germans in such glowing terms. It's people like these that renew one's faith in humanity, and they become dear, dear friends of ours. And then we returned to Germany 2010 because a brand new public high school in my former hometown was named in my honor. So now we have the Marion Blumenthal Oberschule in Hoya, tremendous celebration, and very courageous for this little town to redress what happened so many years ago in their midst. And the night before the celebration, we commemorated the night of broken glass on the site of our synagogue, where our synagogue once stood. Difficult trips, yes, but no regrets having returned. And what, Nathaniel?
5 minutes.
What's 5 minutes? That's all I have is 5 minutes. I only have 5 minutes? Ay, ay, ay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. You said you want to be done at 11:30.
Yeah, about 11:30. Okay, we will. Okay,
So,
let me take a few questions from the
course.
students,
of course.
and then I will have some.
Let me ask the other classes first because I have a list. So that's what I was kind of working on. This is kind of like the list. I was just going through my list. My class came up with a list of like a bunch of questions. And so I was kind of just going through the ones that keep getting repeated. You did answer a lot of them already, which I told them you were going to do. But let's go to Miss Lance. Do any of the kids in your class have any questions? Oh shoot, hold on. You can't unmute, can you? I unmuted you. I did it.
Hi, thank you for meeting with us today. The kids say you answered all the questions that they had prepared, so thank you.
Good.
Let's ask Miss Ray if there are any other questions. I already did. I pressed the button.
I'm
Give-
often, okay.
Just give me 1 second. I unmuted her. So she's gonna ask the next one. And then I'm gonna have a few kids come up if possible. There you go.
All right, I have one student that wants a question.
Go ahead.
Miss Ray, is the student gonna unmute or? Because I need
see.
to know
Yeah.
who that is.
Okay.
Who? So I could unmute them because they don't have the ability to do it themselves. Uh-oh. All right, I'm gonna try something. I'm gonna let the student who wants to do this to unmute. So just the student in Miss Ray's class, can you unmute yourself? Go ahead, sweetheart. Okay. If not, it's okay. Let's have Brian. Oh wait, never mind. Sorry. Jamari, what's up?
Somebody's gonna ask them. So mute yourself.
My question is, what is the red ribbon on the cover of
Yes.
the book?
So yeah, it's a little hard to hear. You know how you remarked that you didn't like the cover of the book, right? The red ribbon though, what's the significance? Is there any significance?
Yeah, they told me it's hope, it's love, and in the midst of all that terror and all that horror with the barbed wire, there is still hope and love out there. Okay, so that's what they're telling me. Okay. They were, as I
Okay.
said, they were in charge,
So
but
that wasn't like something you had come up with.
I didn't come up with that.
Okay,
But
got it.
there was something in the book though pertaining to that bow that I did come up with. So they accepted that advice or that. But
Luz, do you want to unmute yourself or do you want to come up here to ask your question? All right, you want me to ask it? Or you're gonna come up here? Come here. I want you to ask the one that a lot of kids asked about the come on. Be brave.
Christina,
Yes, please.
do you still have the scar of the
I still
burn?
have the scar. You need to know, young lady, that this happened about 75, 80 years ago, a long time, and I have a wonderful capacity to heal well mentally as well as physically. So I am okay with that. It's
right.
still there, but it has faded a lot. Yep.
Brian, come here. I want you to ask your first question. Come on. No, not that one. Come here. I have your first one. I have the entire thing up. Come on. Brian, hurry up, please. And then the languages.
How many languages do you know?
Okay, ik spreek een klein beetje Hollands. I speak a little bit of Dutch. I nehme der Beret Hevrit Ketzat. I speak some Hebrew. Ich spreche ein sehr gutes Deutsch. I speak an excellent German. And I do speak some English, right? Right. Thank goodness.
A little bit of English. Could you? Oh yeah, thank you, Brian. Let's have. At least 5 kids asked if you actually you had kept the Jewish star, but at least 5 kids asked if you kept.
And you
Any of the
saw it,
pebbles.
right? You saw
Yes,
the
yes.
Jewish star. It is
Did you-
amazing that my mother was able to keep this and document that appear in the book.
Yeah.
She was an extraordinary foresighted lady. I mean, she, not knowing whether we would ever survive, but somehow she kept, she was a very organized lady. She kept important papers that she felt were important to keep. Maybe someday we would survive, then these important papers would come to be to our advantage to show and to have. And because of the documentation, the book was published. Without documentation, anyone can tell a story, but we had documentation that made a difference. And that's all my mother's doing. Amazing, amazing, amazing lady.
Their question was though, I know Walter, now, Albert had lost his book bag.
But
Albert had lost his book bag when he
Yeah.
was jumping into the train.
Right.
Did you keep any of the 4 perfect pebbles or did those stay?
oh no,
Marion Bell-
that was just my daily way of keeping myself busy. They were my survival techniques. They were my survival skills. And now don't tell anyone, they were not always perfect. There's no such thing as perfect unless you make it out of plastic or something. They were not always perfect, but it didn't matter. It was
Okay.
my game. I made the rules. And sometimes there were pieces of wood, don't tell anyone. But no matter what, I had to find 4 of similar, and it worked for me. And you need to know that it was just a beyond terrible time. And I was so lucky that I had such an imaginative mind to come up with all these imaginative games. And it kept me busy. And it kept me busy with something sort of constructive, I would say, for sure.
For sure.
There were 2 things. No, there's one more thing I need you to know. I'm often asked if I have a tattoo on my arm. I do not. That was done in Auschwitz only. It was not done in any of the other major camps or sub-camps. It was done in Auschwitz only, okay? For no reason than to torment our people, to inflate, dehumanize our people. So it was just a mentality we'll never understand. And you need to know these men and women went home to their own families at night as though they had a 9-to-5 job. There are two things that I hope that you remember from this morning's presentation. Number one, the Holocaust did happen. Unfortunately, there are people out there who have their own agenda, who deny that this has happened, and that's oh so dangerous. Number two, be good and kind towards one another, please. Please be good and kind towards one another. And with that, I wish each and every one of you a healthy, happy, productive future in a world of love and peace. And you all consider yourself hugged by me, okay? And hopefully that one day we can see one another in person so I can give you true hugs, okay? My best to you. And Mr. Hoch, I thank you for having given me this opportunity to speak with your 5th grade students. And
No,
now I'd like to share a song with you.
Oh, I
Do
can
we
pull
have
that up,
time
right?
For that?
Yeah, I'm gonna get it right now.
Yeah.
And no, again, as always, thank you for taking the time to speak to us. And I will never understand how you can speak for an hour straight. No break. It's crazy each time.
The will.
Yeah. Okay, here it is. I found it. So I guess, do you want to talk about the, oh wait, give me 1 second because I
Okay.
didn't share audio. I didn't share audio.
Uh,
Share sound. Perfect.
This is a song that is,
No, he's going the wrong
we're
area.
going the wrong
Yeah,
area.
it's up above the down.
The song?
It's above.
That's, all right.
This is always where I play the song.
The song right there.
Down, low.
Go down a bit.
Yeah, the plus button right here.
Yeah, but this- We can't hear it.
I haven't started it yet. You want me to start it?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's right here.
it's a title song of a musical, Four Perfect Pebbles, and it's sung by an 11-year-old girl.
Whose name is Lyric, right?
The lyrics,
Yes.
I don't see them.
He's got it.
Four perfect pebbles in my hand, some made of granite, some of sand, found in this dark and desolate land. Four perfect pebbles in my hand. Mother comforts Albert and me, Father shields us from misery. No parent's love can ever erase this sad and forgotten lonely place. Four perfect pebbles do I see, one for each member of my family. I hold them tight, I will not cry. All will live, no one will die. If I should lose my precious stones, my secret hiding place will reveal more perfect pebbles far beneath these barracks made of wood and steel. Four perfect pebbles do I see, Mother, Father, Albert, and me. I count them over one by one. I fall fast asleep. My work is done.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hoch, very much.
No worries.
Thank you so much. And I wish you all a good spring season, happy Passover, happy Easter. Just stay healthy and well and be good towards one another, please. Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you again for everything. Do you and Nathaniel still need my help?
No. Oh, yeah, you wanted his help with something.
Yeah, but it's got to be free from the kids first.
Yeah, you free yourself from the children, from the students.
Yes, ma'am. I could do that.
Yeah.
If that's it, Miss Ray, I think you guys can unmute yourselves if you guys want to say anything. Miss Lawrence, if Mr. Rivera, if anyone wants to wish a final message or anything like that.
You should not do this now. You should not do this now.
All right.
You know, it's not a good time because we're
Well,
pressed.
excuse me.
Nathaniel, we're pressed with time.
Okay. So either way, Miss Ray, do you guys have anything, any last words? Miss Lawrence?
We're pressed with time though.
Thank you again for meeting with us. We learned a lot. The meaning of hope is something that we could all benefit from. And your story was incredible. So thank you again for sharing your story with us all.
Thank you for having given me that opportunity. Thank you. Is this Ms. Ham?
No, Miss Ham, they actually had a meeting at the end. This is Miss
Meeting
Lawrence.
again.
She's one of
Oh,
the other fifth grade
principals all
teachers.
have the meetings. Okay. I guess to keep the thing going, they need to connect with one another. That's good. Okay. Thank you.
The Miss Lawrence is the fifth grade teacher, is one of the fifth grade teachers. Miss Ray is the other fifth grade teacher. And Mr. Kadaga is the other fifth grade teacher. So we have 4 classes online right now with us. Mr. Kadaga or Mr. Rivera, do you guys have any questions from your class? I mean, any messages to say or anything?
No, thank you. We're okay. Thanks.
All right, well, well, thank you guys again. Yeah, I don't want to end the meeting, but I am going to end the recording. So again, thank you for everything. And I'll stay on for a few more minutes if you need me.
Thank you. They really is no. It's not.
Although if you said like